everyone. It's your girl, Marcy Thomas, and I'm back with you for an extra special episode of the BGC Book Club. So please come on in the room, everybody. Go ahead and like this and share this out because I know that there are so many of you who are excited about this conversation. So make sure you get your friends to come on in the room, as we like to say, for what's going to be a really dynamic conversation with a wonderful person who has a beautiful family story that she's going to share with us. So I am coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, by way of Cleveland, Ohio, and a bunch of places in between. So I always like to see who's in the room, if you don't mind sharing where you're joining us from, just so we can get an idea of who all is here. And I'm going to tell you up front, please, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to share because we want to include you in this conversation as well. So I am really honored to have with us A'Lelia Bundles, who is the author of 2 books that celebrate her powerful lineage, Joy Goddess, A'Lelia Walker and the Harlem Renaissance, which just came out recently, and On Her Own Ground, The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker, which was a New York Times bestseller that inspired Netflix's Self-Made. Ms. Bundles is also founder of the Madam Walker Family Archives and has spent 30 years in network news at NBC and ABC. She is a Harvard and Columbia graduate who has written for the New York Times, Essence, Anscape, and so much more. She serves on multiple boards related to history, arts, and social justice, and has received honors including an Emmy, a DuPont Gold Baton, and a Forbes 50 over 50 Impact Award. And there's so many things that I could say about her and all of her accolades, but what we really want to do is go ahead and dive into this conversation about Joy Goddess. So without any further delay, let's welcome A'Lelia Bundles to the BGC Book Club. Welcome.
Marcy, thank you for that very nice introduction. I love being here with you this evening.
Yes, and as I told you before and just said, it's such an honor because I've been a fan of your work and all the things that you're doing to tell stories in general, but specifically stories about your family and history and all of that. So it is indeed an honor to have you here. So now I know that your new book, baby, it's been out for about a month, maybe a little over that now.
Right.
But it's something what people don't know. It's been cooking in the oven for quite a while.
That is true. That this book took a long time to get all those facts right.
Yes. So how does it feel to really be able to tell your great
That's
grandmother
right. This is
story?
A'Lelia Walker's my great grandmother. So
Right.
yes,
Right.
well, so having, as you said, On Her Own Ground, The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker was the first really major comprehensive biography of Madam C.J. Walker, who people know as the entrepreneur and philanthropist. But writing about A'Lelia Walker, her daughter, and my namesake was a very different experience. But in fact, when I was younger, I was actually more interested in A'Lelia Walker's story because she knew the writers of the Harlem Renaissance when I was in high school in the late 60s and early 70s, and I was discovering Black literature. I was drawn to her because she knew Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston and Countee Cullen. So I've come full circle writing about both women.
Yes, and of course you're named after her, which we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into the conversation. So that's something like, who is this lady that I'm named after?
Right, exactly.
So that's pretty powerful. And I mean, there's so many places that we could start, but I just love the fact that, as you said, that there is this family, there's this lineage, there is, the history that surrounds both women's lives. And, what an honor it is really for you to even be able to tell that story or their stories, because how many of us really don't even know, what happened with our, historical figures or our matriarchs or patriarchs.
Yeah, and part of what I really love doing is encouraging other people to learn their family stories, because while these 2 women are famous,
Right.
there are other people in my family whose stories are very interesting to me, and I'm diving more deeply into those stories. But yes, they are sort of the obvious ones because they're famous, they're written about, other people knew who they were. But everybody's family has these heroines who made a way out of no way. And part of what I try to do in telling Madam Walker's story and A'Lelia Walker's story is to reframe American history so
Yes.
that we can see all of the women in our families. Madam Walker is Civil War, Reconstruction, World War One. A'Lelia Walker is Reconstruction, World War One, Harlem Renaissance, the Great Depression. And our stories as Black women generally have not been centered. More and more of us are writing about them. They are now, but certainly when I was growing up, they were not in my history books.
Right. That is so true. Because I've oftentimes told people the first, and I mean it was fiction, but like the first even fiction book that I read was the first year in college, and that was The Color Purple. Because it's just our stories weren't really even being told, or whether it's fiction or whether it's history, we're not hearing those things. So I do know because I've read the book and I know a little bit about you. You stated you were originally like more interested in your great grandmother's story, but it was in college that a professor encouraged you to write about your great great grandmother.
That's right. Well, and actually, it was in graduate school. So I wrote my first report about A'Lelia Walker when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote about A'Lelia Walker and the Harlem Renaissance. And in college, I was, sort of interested because I was taking a few Black literature courses and I would run across Alelia's name. But when I got to Columbia in journalism school in the fall of 1975, my advisor for my master's paper was a woman named Phyllis Garland. This was that era when Black professors were kind of new to the scene.
Mm-hmm.
The doors were opening up, and as the only Black woman on the faculty, I was very happy to have her as my advisor. And I gave her some topics that were kind of cliched topics for my paper. And at the end of the conversation, she said, "Your name is A'Lelia. Do you have any connection to Madam Walker and A'Lelia Walker?" And I was certainly not telling people about this connection. I think she probably knew the answer because she was a journalist. But I said, "Yeah, that's my family." And she said, "That's what you're going to write your paper about." And that validated it for me because in 1975, there were not a lot of books being published
Mm-hmm.
by or about Black women. It's not that we hadn't written those stories,
Right.
but the major publishing houses were not interested in publishing them. So she gave me the confidence to write about this family story.
Mm-hmm. And well, just a little bit about growing up in your family. Were people really talking a lot about your ancestors, or not so much? Because sometimes families it's an ongoing thing, and other times they may not be saying a lot. So, what was it like for you,
Well,
even growing up?
it was really kind of organic. We did not sit around the dinner table talking about Madam Walker, but my mother was vice president of the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company. So that meant I would occasionally go with her to her office and play on her typewriter and adding machine before calculators and computers. And I would go with her to the factory where the ladies were still mixing up the Walker products by hand. And the silverware that we used every day had Madam Walker's monogram.
Wow.
And there was a baby grand piano in our living room on which I learned to read music. And that had been in A'Lelia Walker's apartment in Harlem. So I was surrounded by things that had belonged to the Walker women. And I knew this was part of my family. But I think my mother was really wise about not making it such a big deal, which allowed me to come to it on my own terms.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I'm just thinking how powerful that is to have those things, because how many of us don't have mementos,
right?
Of our family members and things like that. Oh, we have someone coming in from Kansas City. Excited for this conversation. Yes, thank you so much for being here. Thank you. But yes, just to think about the fact of having those things, it's just kind of a part of your life.
Yeah,
So,
it really was organic, and I think that I am the sort of the last person standing in my family. I'm kind of my father, my mother, my brothers are deceased, and so I'm the one who cleans out the houses after everybody dies, which means I have all the stuff. But I feel very fortunate that multiple generations of my family saw their place in history and saved things. So my heart breaks when somebody tells me they've cleaned out grandma's house and it was too much stuff and they just threw things away. But you have to sift through everything because that's your history, that's your heritage. And, even if you just say, I'm going to keep one box of things, pick
Right.
out the things that are important so that 2 and 3 generations from now will have those keepsakes.
That is so important to have that. So, of course, you embarked on telling these stories, and as you've mentioned, you've already written 4 books about Madam C.J. Walker, and a lot of us are familiar with her because, well, some of the myths that we hear that she did the straightening comb, which isn't true,
Which
but
isn't true.
but there are a lot of times, being the first Black woman millionaire, all these things. So we hear like little bits and pieces, and many people may have either read the books or seen the Netflix itself made. But in having so much about her, what made it so important for you to go up a generation and really tell Alilia's story as well?
When I was writing On Her Own Ground, I thought initially that I was going to write kind of a double biography of both women. And I realized, at some point in that process that A'Lelia Walker really needed her own story, that their lives were intertwined, but they really represented different eras of history. So
Mm-hmm.
in On Her Own Ground, I tried to set the stage and to develop the relationship between mother and daughter because that they are important to each other. Madam Walker's motivation when she was still Sarah Breedlove, the poor uneducated washerwoman, was trying to make her daughter's life better. So that motivated her. A'Lelia Walker would not exist as the joy goddess who Langston Hughes, named because of her great parties, had it not been for the wealth that her mother created. So there's a lot of intersection between the two women's lives. And Madam Walker is, as I said, she really represents that arc of our history from the end of slavery through World War One, during that era, that Jim Crow era, but also that era of creating organizations like the NAACP and the National Association of Colored Women. When things were so segregated, we had to create our own businesses and our own political organizations. A'Lelia Walker and her circle of friends are the people who benefited from what that generation was doing. And so they had a little bit more leeway to have a good time and to not only be focused on the segregation, but the Harlem Renaissance, while we think of it as parties and all of those things, it is in some ways a response to resilience and resistance.
It is.
To the Jim Crow era. People were trying to create their own joy.
And A'Lelia definitely does that. So, as the book starts out and telling the story, there are bits and pieces that we see, of course, how they come to mother and daughter and, the things that are happening with Madam C.J. and at that point in her life, becoming Madam C.J. Walker after not being Madam C.J. Walker, and the things that happen like with Lilia's father and all of that. So we kind of start at the very beginning in the telling of her story and how it's interwoven. And, one of the things that really stood out to me, actually, even throughout the story, is the fact that, yes, it's mother and daughter, but they're very different because they're coming up in different times. And, what does it really mean when you have this larger than life parent and you're trying to find your own way in the world? And that was something that really stood out just in looking at Lilia or A'Lelia and how she functioned in her world as well.
Right. Well, so, and I know, thank you for going back and forth so that people who have not read the book, she was born Lelia McWilliams. So Sarah Breedlove married Moses McWilliams. Their child was named Lelia McWilliams. Lelia McWilliams later changed her name to A'Lelia, and she became known as A'Lelia Walker. The Walker came from Madam Walker's third husband, Charles Joseph Walker. Even though he did not adopt A'Lelia Walker, she started using her mother's last name because she wanted to make sure that she got the benefits of being Madam Walker's daughter.
Right.
The A apostrophe is something that she added in 1923. And you're absolutely right. This sort of having a larger than life parent can be overwhelming because other people have expectations, and especially when it's someone who is as much of an original as Madam Walker, that she created jobs for thousands of women. She built a business. She traveled all over the United States and Central America and the Caribbean. She held national conventions and motivated these women to be economically independent, to buy homes and to educate their children. She was involved with the NAACP, the anti-lynching movement. So that's like within
Right.
a generation, she becomes all of those things. And so people look at her daughter and think, well, what are you going to do? And
Right.
that's a really heavy burden for someone to carry. And I think, we see it today with
We do.
people who are famous and whose children are trying to figure out their own way. I don't want to. This is not a parallel, but you can imagine with Beyonce, for instance,
Yes.
and Blue. That's a lot to carry, and it seems like when I just so I went to see this show at MetLife, and at least from again, I'm not in the beehive, so I'm really not in the inside in any way, but you see that she's trying to let her girls
Mm-hmm.
be who they are, but at the same time test those waters. But you don't have to be famous to know that there are sometimes expectations that a
Right.
parent will have that a child wants to go in an entirely different direction. I will just say if in my case, both my parents were involved in the hair care business. And
Right.
so there could have been an expectation that that's what I would do, but they really encouraged me to follow my own, path. And I'm grateful for that.
Yes, we wouldn't have these great stories. So indirectly, you're still involved, but it's from a
Right.
different perspective. You are the chronicler, the storyteller, and all of that. So that's really powerful. But yes, I'm not in the Beehive either, but I did go see Blue in concert.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was a joy to watch, it was a joy to
Yes,
watch.
yes. Because I was telling everybody, I'm going to see Blue. Beyonce is just kind of there singing. I'm going to see Blue. Kind of hype her up. But yeah, it is a thing just to think about and we can move on. But the other person I'm thinking about, like LeBron James and Bronny James,
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of pressure.
it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure. So as we're watching Lilia grow up and become a young woman, we see these types of pressures, that are happening with her. But in some way, she's spoiled, because once mom starts making some money, there are things that she's able to do that, that she might not have been, that she would not have been able to do otherwise, for sure. But then she also is testing the waters and figuring some things out for herself and not necessarily always wanting to be what mama wants her to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you are the person who founds the business, you want things done a certain way. Alelia was running the New York office. She was perfectly happy to have her own agents and redesign her salon and build her townhouse. She was the one who encouraged her mother to have a presence in Harlem. I think that was a master move on her part
Absolutely.
because while the company was headquartered in Indianapolis, Alelia Walker said we need to be in Harlem as Harlem was becoming the Black cultural and political mecca. That
Mm.
meant that they were more well known than some of their competitors. But that having happened, now Alelia wanted to run things her own way. And her mother was like, well, I think I want to tweak this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One of the other things that really stood out to me is, we know the power of hair care and products and all that. It's still a thing today. We know
It's
that.
very much a thing.
Very much a thing. But I did not realize, not just with, the hair salons, but the barbershops as well, that it really was a thing for people to own these spaces and have these spaces that, yes, you're going in there because you want to look and present in a certain way, whatever that is. But then they also become like these hubs of the community as well.
Yeah, that was one of the sort of discoveries that just made me understand the complexity of Madam Walker's life. Because as you say, people, it's like, oh, Madam Walker, isn't she the one who invented the hot comb? So no, she did not. And I was glad to kind of dispense with that and to really discover what she was trying to do, at a time when most Americans didn't have indoor plumbing or electricity. Hygiene was really different, and people had really bad scalp disease, scalp infections, not just dandruff, but scalp infections. And she developed a product, a shampoo, and then an ointment that was like Vaseline with sulfur that healed those sores. Hair could grow back, but it was such a common problem that she was able to develop a sales force of women who were selling this product to others, and that helped her really develop her business. But what I think I began to see is that the product, while it was necessary and desired, it was a means to an end to help
Yes.
Black women become economically independent.
Mm-hmm.
And that then propelled her to organize the women. And so those women now owned their own businesses, which was very important in an era when most of the work that Black women could get was either as a sharecropper or a domestic, a household
Right.
domestic. And so
Right.
she helped give women that independence. And, part of what I think you're leading to is that, for instance, during the civil rights movement, when the churches became too much of a target, was the beauty shops where people could meet, because of people assumed, oh, there's, nothing's happening in the beauty shop, but those women owned those spaces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's something, the economic, having economic empowerment, because this is a time when, of course, you know, women kind of had to be married to have certain things, but these were instances that gave them an opportunity that even if they were married, that they could have something that was their own, that
That's
they could,
right.
maybe they and their families could survive a little better, and maybe they could make some different decisions in their lives versus just, and not having to be up under the man. I'm just gonna call a spade a spade, call it what it is. Be able to do something of your own. So it's just really powerful to see that.
Hmm.
And just thinking about, how they built and started to build, and also how it became a philanthropic thing. So it wasn't just money for the sake of money. It was the thing to be able to support NAACP and so many of these other organizations that were coming up, to be able to help the people in the community that maybe couldn't help themselves in the same way.
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that, if I think, sometimes people kind of get fixated on the, is Madam Walker, was she a millionaire? Was she the first woman millionaire? Whatever. And I sort of don't get focused on that. I mean, I can document that she was a millionaire when she died, but the thing for me that really makes her worth studying and makes me interested is that she helped other people create wealth, that she helped other people be economically independent. At her 1917 convention, convention of her sales agents, at what had to have been one of the first conventions of Black businesswomen or American businesswomen, she said to them, I want you to understand that your first duty is to humanity. I
Mm,
want others to look at us and realize that we care not just about ourselves, but about others. And she gave prizes not just to the women who sold the most products, but to the women who contributed the most to charity. And at the end of the convention, the women sent a telegram to President Woodrow Wilson urging him to support legislation to make lynching a federal crime. So
mm,
this went well beyond the make money for yourself. It's what are you doing to help the community?
And those are lessons we can really continue to use even today.
Absolutely. And it's, we're in just such a challenging time.
Yes.
To put a fine point on it. And I feel like I came of age, I'm 73. So I graduated from college in 1974. And that was a moment when the doors were opening up. Women were moving into law school and law firms and corporations. My first job at NBC News as a producer, essentially a producer in training, was because women had sued the networks, because when young women were hired as secretaries and researchers, 10 years later, they would still be in the same job. Young men were hired as junior producers, and 10 years later, they would be senior producers and executive producers. So there was clear discrimination. But that was a moment when opportunity was there. And even if somebody didn't want you in the room, they were unlikely to tell you to your face.
Hmm.
Now we are seeing that we're being told, we don't want you in the room and you can't come in.
Right. 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 or we're gonna boot you out. It whatever we can do to try to.
Whatever we can do, we're going to make it illegal for you to talk about your history.
Right, right. All of
And I
those
mean, and part of the reason I write the books that I write is because I did not have those books. I did not have those stories when I was growing up. I mean, I learned them because my grandfather loved history and told me stories, and I learned these things because we had some of those books in our house, and I was just a curious young person, but I
things.
wasn't getting it in school.
Yeah, definitely not. And even if you were being educated in a space that was predominantly black, because it just wasn't, it wasn't there. It wasn't there. So of course, as we're seeing Alelia, she's living her life as a young woman, and we get to see some things about her personal life as well, because those are all the things that make up a person's life. But I found it interesting. There is a part in the book where we talk about a love triangle of sorts.
Right?
So she had an interesting journey. It's like the person that you want versus the person that maybe your parent wants you to be with.
An age old story. So, and that, one of the things with Alelia Walker, I mean, she's kind of a mythical figure for some people who know something about the Harlem Renaissance, almost kind of a caricature where a couple of historians have painted her as kind of a dilettante, and she didn't, they said she didn't do anything but play bridge. And so they kind of missed the point about
Mm-hmm.
what her life really was. But I wanted to take her beyond that kind of myth and that iconic figure to really understand who she was as a person, what her triumphs were, what her challenges were. And this story with the love triangle is, for me, fascinating, and something that the Netflix series entirely missed and ignored. So we can talk about
Mm-hmm.
that. But in this case, Alelia Walker had two boyfriends. Both were handsome, both were doctors. One was a good guy, and one was a bad boy.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, her mother liked the good guy,
Of
and
course.
the bad boy was more exciting. And
Mhm.
so the story takes many twists and turns. It's not exactly what people think it might be. It becomes one thing and then it's another thing.
Right, right, right. But in that, we've already kind of spoken to, without telling it all, because we do want you to read the book
I
if you
want you
haven't.
to read the book.
But in that, it's like it's a discovery of who she wants to be and how she wants to show up, which Lelia, but y'all got to read it. But I love that though, because we've heard of many, like some of our other iconic people in history that have done that. They've taken on another name. It's like another persona, because yes, I may have been known this way, but I decide how I want to show up in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you're putting it that way. It's like she is really thinking deeply about how she wants to show up. And there are different things that happen along the way. Her mother's death, and she has a stroke. She recovers from the stroke, but that has an impact on her, as it would on anybody. I mean, people who we know, friends and ourselves, you have a major health episode that changes your perspective. Or there may be someone you meet along the way who is doing something that you admire, and you may take some ideas from them. So she is affected by what's going on and by the friendships that she has.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And dealing with grief, a lot of times, grief can really shift your atmosphere, especially such a big looming figure in your life. I mean, it doesn't even have to be a famous person, just that person that you love, and that's your person, so to speak. And they're no longer here, and you're trying to figure all of these things out. I also liked seeing the fact that because she was a woman of a certain amount of means, that she did a lot of travel. Because remember, y'all, this is in the early 1900s. And just thinking of all the places that she went and the things that she got to do, that was not common.
No, and she had, yes, she had a lot of mobility. I mean, something that was, kind of another revelation for me. While we do think of people as, the ancestors being kind of immobile, a lot of people moved a lot right after slavery. People were looking for family members. It wasn't yet the Great Migration, but some of Madam Walker's siblings moved to New Mexico, moved to Colorado, and this is in the 1880s, and you're thinking, well, I'm thinking everybody's just kind of down on the farm, but
Right.
they were moving around. But once Madam Walker had money, though she actually, I was going to say once she had money, but she actually moved early. She moved from Louisiana when her first husband died. She moved to St. Louis, then to Denver, then to Pittsburgh, then to Indianapolis. So she was pretty mobile. But
Mm-hmm.
Alelia Walker, after her mother had money, bought, lived in Los Angeles, had a house in Los
Mm-hmm.
Angeles, persuaded her mother to be in Harlem. They both traveled to the Caribbean and Central America. Alelia Walker went to, in 1921, this fabulous trip, which I think is kind of an eat, pray, love
Yes.
situation because she's getting over one husband and thinking about the next one. But she sails to Paris in
Yes.
first class, a black woman in first class in November of 1921. And believe me, people were looking at her wondering who she
Right.
was.
Right.
But Paris, London, Monte Carlo, Rome, Nice, Cairo, Addis Ababa. So she was getting around and
Mm.
making friends. That she expanded her circle to be international. And on that ship, on that trip to Paris, she was making friends with Europeans who
Yes.
didn't carry some of the same racism that some Americans carried.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. So I really want to bring that out because nowadays you have a lot of women, men, people that are traveling in a way, and it's like, oh, it might seem like it's new, but there were some people who were doing it a long time
Doing a
ago,
long time ago,
you
right?
know,
Absolutely.
and dealing with the challenges of all that because I mean this was Jim Crow, all of these different things, so it wasn't easy. But in the book, I love how, well, not love, but it was just interesting to see how her experiences when she ran into trouble, it was the Americans, it wasn't necessarily the other people.
Well, I just saw Elaine Welteroth, the magazine editor, and she'd been spending I don't know, a month or so in Italy, and she just did I think it was an Instagram reel, and she said people ask me, were the Italians, did I experience any racism? And she said, no, the racism I experienced was from Americans.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
people she said there were these guys and they were in a restaurant. Of course, she's staying in the best hotels, and they waited until her husband walked away and they came over to her and they said, "Is your husband a football player?" And,
Mm.
and she's like, if we're not athletes or
Right,
entertainers, you don't think we can be in the same space that you're in? And
right.
so she sort of played with them a little while. And then she says, no, my husband's a scientist.
Okay.
So
Okay. I love that. I saw a young man earlier today who had on some socks, and it was lined out at the top. It said athlete. It was lined out. Then it said rapper, and it was lined out. Then underneath it, it said entrepreneur. So
there you go.
there you go. People make a lot of assumptions, so that was definitely happening at that time with Alelia as well. But when she was, as she was traveling around, she was carrying on some of the things that her mother did in terms of the business and stuff like that. But when she was at home in Harlem, because somebody's already asked about the people that she met, but she was meeting all these wonderful people because she was hosting these salons, so to speak, and things like that. So it's really interesting to see how for her the arts was something that she was really into in the ways that maybe that her mother wasn't.
Yeah, I think that she was trying to find her own philanthropy. But
Mm-hmm.
what one thing that was interesting to me is that they both loved the arts. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that Alelia Walker developed some of her appreciation for music and for theater because that was a bond with both women, that they entertained together and they would have the best musicians as their live entertainment. They both loved going to the theater. So that was a bond between two women where Madam Walker's philanthropy was more likely to be around social justice and around politics. Alelia Walker was aware of that and cared about it, but she really had an affinity for the arts and for the theater people and the musicians and the writers and the artists.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So someone was asking, they wanted to ask about her interconnected social circle, which included names like Cecilia Lewis Lacey, Eunice Shreves, Dorothy R. Peterson, Olive May Thomas.
So, those are names. I know that there's a person who's been really helpful in letting me know about that era, and those are names that I think he has done a lot of research on. I don't have a lot of material that directly connects them to her, though her circle was really quite large. And her closest friends, as you know from the book, were people like Geraldine Disman, who later was known as Jerry Major, who was the society columnist for Jet and Ebony. Um, Bessie Bearden, who was the mother of the famous artist Romery Bearden.
Mm-hmm.
Other people like oh, Edna Lewis Thomas, who was an actress, and Mamie White, who was the daughter of a congressman, the last black congressman of the 1800s. So this was her closest circle of friends, but she had a wide circle of friends that included Paul and Essie Robeson and James Weldon Johnson and his wife Grace Nail Johnson. So she knew a lot of people, but her closest circle of friends was pretty small. As gregarious a woman as she was, um, she she knew everybody. She was welcoming to everybody, but she kept that personal circle pretty small.
Which makes a lot of sense because
Hmm.
even as we watch her navigate personal relationships, there's also a thing of like who can you really trust because she is someone who is known.
That's right.
And who can you allow into your circle that's really there because they're interested in you versus maybe interested in what they see that you have, which again is not much different from things that we see today with successful, individuals in general, but women specifically. Like,
Yeah,
what's happening.
yeah. No, you're right. I mean, you have to, and we see in the book there were a couple of people who were her friends
Mm-hmm.
who kind of betrayed her. So that's real life.
Mm-hmm. That is so much real life. So I want to talk a little bit about the homes because I know that she had the business there, had the salon and things like that. Of course, the headquarters was in Indianapolis, but there were also the homes or the spaces where they lived. I want to talk a little bit about that because I found that quite interesting that, because of the money that they had, they were able to have all these different spaces to live and then, of course, entertain.
Yes. Well, I think part of the reason that Alelia Walker became the joy goddess of Harlem's 1920s is that she did have these spaces. There were other Black people of means who had beautiful homes. A number of her friends lived in the beautiful buildings on Strivers Row in Harlem, and those are big townhouses, and they could entertain. But she had this combination of a mansion in Irvington, New York, a spacious townhouse right in the middle of Harlem, and then a private apartment just a few blocks away. So when she wanted to get away from all of the chatter and clatter, she could go off to this small apartment. But in each of those places, she gave parties, and her parties at Villa Lawaro in Irvington would be weekend long parties. People would arrive on Friday, they'd play cards and dance, and then on Sunday they might go horseback riding. So she really, she created a space because she had the money to do that. She entertained. She had the money to hire the private musicians and to have the good food. And it was prohibition, but she always had a stash of champagne.
Right, right. Yeah, I just think it's so good to see that. So as I mentioned earlier, when you hear about these salons, it's kind of what it was. She could bring people in where you could have, like the Langston Hughes and or Paul Robeson or whoever come in and everybody's kind of talking about whether it's the literature or the music or the art or the music, whatever the case may be, and having these really powerful conversations. But she's setting the stage for them or giving them a place to be able to meet in that way.
And I think today we kind of take for granted that, you can have a gathering and you can invite a wide range of people. But that during that period of time, it was still really unusual to have an integrated party, to
Hmm.
have an international party. I mean, her homes, were open to the friends she'd met when she was overseas. When they would come to the party. One would say, "Oh, look up Alelia Walker when you're in New York." She had white friends from downtown, her black friends in Harlem, her friends from around the country. Her straight friends and her queer friends all knew that they were equally welcome, and
Mhm.
that was unusual for the time. People were, afraid to mingle, but she opened her door and said, "Everybody who I invite is welcome." One of the people who commented about her during that period of time, as I was doing my research, I ran across this quote from one of the Society columnists, and she said, Alelia Walker would have a party. She would get on the phone and she'd say, "Darling, I'm having a party tonight, and it wouldn't be complete without you. Absolutely not." And that
Mhm.
people flocked to her, this writer said, like bees flock to honey. And I
Mhm.
think that was the personality that she had. People who want, another person said, who would never have gotten together in the same room except for her invitation to them.
And it's good to see that and to know that. 'Cause, I mean, might have seen things in movies or whatever, and you hear about Harlem, maybe some of the clubs where there might have been a little more mixing and mingling, but to see someone who's actually doing that in her home and welcoming folks, and people feel like they can come and they're going to have a good time, and people supporting one another,
Right.
and things like that as well, because it's like you're learning about things that are going on, and people can work together on different things, and not just for entertainment purposes, but also looking at larger issues that people might need to tend to.
Absolutely.
hmm Because one of the things that I saw that is kind of stood out to me was the things that she was doing to support different war efforts and things
Mm.
like that, or the books for the soldiers and stuff like that. So it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't just a good time.
Well, this was one of the things that I began to learn about her when I was writing on her own ground. And both Madam Walker and Alelia Walker were, knew a lot of people who were in the army, who were part of World War I. And Alelia Walker, again, expected to kind of take on a leadership role, but she did it in her own way. And she became involved with the Circle for Negro War Relief and the Red Cross Auxiliary, but she was involved with the ambulance unit, and where other people were doing good things, buying socks and sending cigarettes and chocolate to the soldiers,
hmm
she was chairing a campaign to raise money to buy an ambulance. And
hmm
this for me was one of the first examples of where she understood the power of celebrity
Yes.
to raise money, and she invited the opera tenor Enrico Caruso to kind of do a cameo at this big event at the Manhattan Casino. And by inviting him, she sold a lot of tickets and they raised enough money to buy the ambulance. And then, as you say, she was involved in um, fundraising to get books for Black soldiers. So she was finding her own way. She was finding her own philanthropy, but doing it in a slightly different way from her mother.
Mm-hmm. We have a question comment. Can you share more about how she gave back in strategic or innovative ways? Did she, like Madam C.J. Walker, leave any lasting gifts through her will or estate?
Thank you, Sister Priester, for that for that question. Yes, it would. I think that this raising money was strategic for the soldiers. She knew what she was doing. Yeah, she raised money for a community center, and instead of just sort of passing the hat, she hosted these interesting fundraisers where she had a casino night. She did
Mhm.
another cabaret night, so she knew that things that would draw people together, they would have a good time, but that would also loosen their wallets. So I think that was strategic. And when she had the idea to open the Dark Tower, so she had this townhouse on 136th Street, and in 1927, she remodeled one floor of the house and decided that it was going to be a place where the young creative people could gather. It
Mhm.
turned out to be, more of a social space that people would come to, but her original concept was really quite innovative and ahead of its time, where she had this idea that the young writers and artists would pay $1 a year to be members,
Mhm.
and they would be able to come eat at reduced prices because they were, of course, starving artists. They didn't have any money. but that the patrons would pay a much higher price, and that would sort of underwrite everything else and sort of create an endowment. That was a grand idea. It didn't
Right.
actually happen that way, but that she thought about that here's something to subsidize these young writers and artists, I think, was a business model that arts organizations still try to use.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yes, it was just seeing that, and also some of the people that were involved in the work with her. It's two people I want to mention specifically that you talk about in terms of the literature, because there have been books that have talked about them recently. One is Jessie Redmond Fawcett, that Victoria Christopher Murray wrote
Right,
about in Harlem Rhapsody, because she's mentioned in the book,
right,
as well. And then you also mentioned Sarah Peterson Delaney, who was a bibliotherapist that Emily Rumble talks about her and bibliotherapy in the Bronx. So I love seeing that, these are women that we may or may not have been aware of, but these are people that were real to your grandmother, your great grandmother's life. And then other people are discovering them and telling their stories as well.
I love that so much more is being written about the women of the Harlem Renaissance. Victoria Christopher Murray's book Harlem Rhapsody really opens up Jessie Fawcett's life, and it's fiction, and so we know that she takes some literary license, but that will make people they'll enjoy the book, but they also can dig more deeply to really learn about this woman. And I think for all of these amazing Harlem Renaissance histories that have been written in the last 50 years, until relatively recently, most of the stories centered on the men of the Harlem Renaissance and left the women out. And there are a lot of writers like Victoria, like me, like others who are excavating the lives of these women and telling their stories in ways that need to be told. I know Emily Bernard is doing a new biography on Nella Larson, who
Mm,
people saw the movie Passing. But
right,
we
right.
need to keep digging more deeply and really telling their stories, putting their stories front and center.
Hmm. And what is so powerful about what you have done, you're like talking about the real person, and and they are talking about them, but fictionalizing it. But I just love to see the tie back to things that really did happen.
Right.
So I
And
have.
I mean, sometimes fiction is a way to really draw people in. It's
Mhm.
you have an opportunity to get into the emotions, things that I can't, like, I can go to the edge, but I can't go over unless I have the documentation.
Right.
But someone else may at some point write a fictional version, and they may be able to imagine some things and speculate on some things that I'm not comfortable as a journalist doing. But you need all of these stories to be able to get people to pay attention to these amazing figures.
Right, because I have to tell you, Alelia, when I started doing this 5 years ago, I didn't realize that I was going to fall in love with like historical fiction. So I do
Hmm.
love historical fiction for that very reason, because I can get some story, get some little juicy stuff or whatever.
Right.
And realizing that people back then were living like people were living now, in terms of technology. My grandfather would say technology changes, but the men and women, all that kind of stuff really
All
does.
that.
Yeah.
Listen, I am almost finished with my friend Dolan Perkins Valdez's book
Yes.
Happy
Yes.
Land,
Yes.
and I was like, Dolan,
Yes.
I'm about, I don't know, I have maybe about 50 more pages. I'm like, I
Yes.
did not see that coming.
Right, right, right. And actually, all those ladies that we've mentioned, those books, they've actually been here. Dolan has been here. Victoria has been here. And Emily Rumble, who bibliotherapy in the Bronx, they've all been here. So please check out some of the previous
That's right.
videos, because
That's right.
we
Right.
talked to those ladies.
Historical fiction is just, really, that you know that they're doing their research, they're coming up with these stories, and then they take it to another level. But we need all of those stories, and the writing is so good.
It is. It is. And it's just, yeah, I love hearing about the Harlem Renaissance. Not much is discussed about this iconic history. Thank you for adding to this untold story. Absolutely.
Well,
And so,
we'll say to, I think it's Tashika. Hope
Chica,
I'm
yeah.
pronouncing it correctly. One of the things that I wanted to do is to tell Amelia Walker's story, to talk about beyond the icon, as I said, and talk about the ups and downs of her personal life. But I also wanted to center her in this community and to really look at this sort of Black middle class, professional women, the people who were her friends, how they were operating in the world, how they were navigating with the racism that was kind of
Mhm.
always that was off stage that they were having to deal with, but how they were living their lives, being their best selves. And
Mhm.
I wanted to create that community for people to see that we were, yeah, we knew that, everybody didn't love us, but we loved ourselves.
Right. That's so important that we love ourselves then and now. But
Hmm.
I do want to talk about research and sources and things like that because, like in the book, like 100 pages, almost 100 pages of the book is just you giving your resources and all those sorts of things. So, yes, you had family, heirlooms and things like that that you can tap into. But just talk a little bit about the research process because, of course, it's not fiction, it is truth. So, but you had to go and go beyond whatever letters you might have found or mementos and things like that, but to like really dive in. So, what was that process like for
Yes. Well, thank you. And for people who love the details, those last 100 pages will be interesting. For people who are not really interested in they don't have to go to those pages, but it's there. And it's for me, it's breadcrumbs for people who want to write about this in the future. It's breadcrumbs for other scholars and other historians. But yes, the research process is kind of fun. It's more fun than writing because you can go down a rabbit hole. But because I started doing this research 50 years ago, that was before the internet. That was when you had to go to the library to go through microfilm. You'd sleep on somebody's couch in Chicago when you wanted to read the Chicago Defender or look through a manuscript collection at the Chicago Public Library. So I did a lot of that kind of traveling in the early days. For the last decade or so, there's so much that's digitized.
you?
Newspapers.com, ProQuest, manuscript collections. So I've been able to benefit from that. But there's no substitute for those original documents, for actually going and touching them, for the fact that I was able to interview people who had known A'Lelia Walker, Jimmy Daniels, who was a cabaret singer, Alberta Hunter, the blues singer, who I met when I was in New York doing research, but a number of people who really were able to tell me what she was like, what it was like to be in the room with her. And I absorbed all of those things. And then, of course, you see the books that are behind me.
Yes.
Um, those, and I actually have read all of these books. There are
Oh,
a bunch of
wow.
other books in my house that that still need to be read. But when I started doing this research in the 70s, there were a handful of books
Hmm.
about Black women who were related to the Harlem Renaissance. But in the last 50 years, there are a number of people who've written about the period of time who have done the research. And so I benefited from that body of work that hadn't been there. And that's, part of my mission, I guess, in life is to make sure that I tell this story and that we continue to build on this body of work so that the next generation has these stories to tell. So that research, that's why I leave all of these
Hmm.
details in my end notes and my acknowledgments and the section that says what became of the people who were closest to
Yes.
A'Lelia Walker.
Yes, because it's definitely a jumping off point for other stories. Because other or a few things that came out to me just in even knowing what your process was. We've already talked about like the family stuff that we have and holding on to things and keeping things, but not just that. If there is something that we could say pass along or put it in an archive or something like that, so those things can be maintained by some of our facilities, because the reality of it is, like in my case, I'm an only child. So it's like if something happens, I'm an only child who doesn't have children. So
Hmm.
if I had certain documents or I have a family member who had documents, what happens to them after I'm gone unless I put them somewhere? So I mean,
Right.
there's the idea of doing that because I think that oftentimes our documents aren't there.
Well,
So
that putting them somewhere is an important point. I think I might have mentioned this, but I'm giving my papers with my Madam Walker Family Archives, all of these things I've collected, to the Schlesinger Library on the History of Women in America. That's at Harvard's Radcliffe Institute.
mhm.
So I'm on that board. That's where I went to school, and I know that it is Angela Davis's papers are there. So there's some Polly Murray papers there. So I know that while it is, by and large, a collection that is predominantly white, there are a lot of really important Black women's papers. Lonnie Guinier's papers are there. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that sometimes we think, well, maybe my papers are not important enough or whatever. But anybody who has done something professionally as a writer, as an institution builder, that I use papers from people who might be considered obscure to help tell the larger story. So it is important that we think what historical society, what HBCU library collection, where would our papers fit?
Mm-hmm. And Kathleen said she enjoyed reading the extensive and detailed research about
Thank
Alelia's
you,
life and times.
Kathleen.
Yes,
Thank you for joining us.
yes. And let me see. Here's another comment. The Utopia Children's House, an Aaliyah charity favorite, was located next to the Myers Building. Okay.
Oh, that's so that thank you for letting me know that, Lawrence. I appreciate that. And
Yes.
that Utopia Children's House, where Alelia Walker helped raise money for it, it was the same building where A. Philip Randolph held the meetings for organizing the March on Washington in
Mm-hmm.
1963.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that stuff is so important. But yes, other people telling their stories that can give you some context of what was happening. The other thing that stood out is the importance of the Black press in being able to tell these stories.
So important, and the Black press is still important. We would not know a tenth of our history if it had not been for the Black press, because when we were being ignored or we were being shunted to, only stories about crime, the Black press was telling our story in full. It was talking about politics, it was talking about the arts, about sports, about churches, about society, parties. So all of those things were help me be able to tell Alelia Walker's story and the story of her circle of friends.
So those are just a couple things that really stood out from from the research process of like where we're able to go to do that. If we have papers, leaving those papers, for people to be able to utilize them later. Looking at the Black press and things like that, and just looking at our stories in the context of everything else that's going on. Because, like for example, you mentioned some of the things that were happening, like the massacre and
Tulsa.
Tulsa happened during that time frame, during their lifetimes. Just different things that were happening, all the while they're building their business and living their lives and giving back and all these things, just to really put those things in context and realizing it really wasn't that long ago.
Not that long ago. And which is another reason why it's so perplexing and confounding, but maybe not, of why our history, there's a desire for us to not know our history, and not just for us to not know our history, but for others to not know our history. Because if you know that history, you understand exactly what's going on today, that this is not new, and that this is a pattern. And knowing that pattern makes some people very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, we mentioned Jerry Major a little earlier. Yes.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Working with Ebony Jet and all that later in time. So I guess because we're in a space where people are trying to not tell our stories or take them away or banning books and all those sorts of things, for those of us who really want to know more of the history, first of all, we appreciate you and others like you who are telling it. But what, if anything, that is it that we can do as consumers of and wanting to know these things? What kind of things can we do to help make sure that stories can still be told?
Well, I mean, I guess there are many things. I'm thinking just kind of a really basic grassroots thing is go to the school board meeting and make sure that history is being taught.
Mm,
Though we know that in some places the school systems are trying to not do that. And so I saw something very creative where I think the Association for the Study of African American Life and History chapters in Florida was given money by a community foundation to have Saturday school. People are doing alternative schools. The churches are teaching Black history. And there's so much that's out there that we can learn. It's somebody can ban a book, but it's on TikTok. The
Right.
stories are on TikTok. The stories are on Instagram, and they're certainly in these books that are behind me. Just if you just look at my bibliography, that is a lesson in itself. The other thing that helps me stay kind of grounded, and I don't know if optimistic is the right word, but that keeps me from being totally discouraged, is reading things like Sherilyn Eifel's Substack. So Sherilyn Eifel, people will recognize that name because she was the head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She now runs the Center for the 14th Amendment at Howard. But if you sign up for her Substack, follow her on Threads and Instagram, and she gives you a great history lesson. Another person who gives a great history lesson is Heather Cox Richardson, who's a historian who's written a number of books, but you can do her Substack. She publishes something on Facebook every day. Michael Harriot. Michael Harriot has a Substack called Contraband. That's what Contraband. Oh, I can't. Contraband Camp.
Okay.
And he wrote a book called Black AF History. So you know what that means.
Right.
But I would say buy that book
Right.
or listen to it on Audible, and he gives you a great history lesson, puts things in perspective. So those are just, three of my suggestions for how to educate yourself.
How to educate ourselves and those who are coming behind us. Have a couple more comments. T says, looking forward to reading your book. As I've been listening to you, I was curious and prompted ChatGPT to give me a bio about A'Lelia Walker and her homes, and a great overview was generated. Yes.
Okay, so Miss Jenkins, let me just say, ChatGPT and my history is often sort of kind of right, but sort of kind of wrong.
Okay.
And so please do not rely on ChatGPT. It's kind of, as you know, it opens the door. If I want to get something summarized and I don't have time to read all 10 pages, then I will kind of go there. But our history is not, the details of our history is not yet in those AI large learning models, even though they are basically trying to steal. I guess my book will probably be put into that, and it will be there. But I'm glad that you were motivated to want to know more, but I would please read the book. Because every time I put something in asking a question about Madam Walker or A'Lelia Walker, I'm like, kind of, sort of, but not really.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, to get to the root of what's real, and utilizing multiple sources as well. I mean, it's the whole thing.
It's the whole thing. It's the whole thing. But yes, it's a great jumping off point. And thank you for wanting to know more. I really appreciate that.
Right, right. Well, there's a question that's here, but before I get to that question, in the book you do talk about Villa Lawaro.
I know it is a tongue twister. I'm amazed. I think I've said it so often I can say it, but it is a tongue twister.
Yes, but yes, I know that that was like the family home, and that it has been purchased by a Black organization, and so even though it's not necessarily in the family, it is in the community. But it's just talk a little bit about that, because it's the whole thing. I know it was with Saving Spaces or the National Historic Preservation organization for years, and then people have to make decisions about what's going to happen. So just talk a little bit about that, because being able to preserve those spaces is important.
Yeah, no, it is important. There are two National Historic Landmarks that are associated with Madam Walker's legacy. One is the Madam Walker Legacy Center in Indianapolis, which was built in 1927, and it was where the Walker Company was headquartered for many years. Has a beautiful theater. It's been restored and is a wonderful place. Madam Walker's home in Irvington, New York, which was built in 1918, Villa Lawaro, which Enrico Caruso named after Lelia Walker Robinson with that Lewaro. That was Madam Walker's home, and she loved it. And she died there in 1919. A'Lelia Walker owned it until she died in 1931. It was sold to a white women's organization, Companions of the Forest, in 1932 or 3, and then it's sort of interim owner in the 1980s, and then a black couple, Harold and Helena Doley, owned it from 1993 until kind of 2016-ish or so. And then it was purchased by Richelieu Dennis and his family foundation. And Richelieu was the founding CEO of Sundial Brands, which makes
Right.
Nubian Heritage and Shea Moisture. So
Mhm.
the house now is owned by the family foundation, and there's a lot of renovation. And even though the previous owners did a lot of work, there's a lot more work to be
Mhm.
done.
Mhm.
And ultimately, it will be a convening place for small gatherings. The village of Irvington will not let it be a big public place, but from
Mhm.
time to time, it's open to the public.
I think that that's just powerful, and it's such a blessing that we were able to bring it back into our community,
Absolutely.
and to keep that, because we oftentimes hear, don't sell this, don't sell that, whatever the case may be, and sometimes things are kind of taken out of your hands where you may not have the choice, but when you have the ability to, and I love that it's still something that is going
Yeah.
to be
No,
available.
I am truly grateful. I mean, some people may have seen the Today Show piece. Al Roker interviewed me at the house for a piece that was on the Today Show earlier this week. So if people on my social media, it's posted. People can find it, or they can go to the Today Show website. But you can see the beauty of the house, and when people have visited, it was a UNCF designer show house in 1998, and people still tell me, "Oh God, I visited the house, and how inspiring it was, what it meant to walk in the same rooms where Madam Walker had walked." And so it does have great symbolism for us, and it's important that it be available to us.
Yes. All right. And we've actually gone a couple minutes over. So I've got one more question from the audience. Ty is asking, I'm loving the book. It's very cinematic. Have you sold the film rights? Given your experience with Netflix, and you said a little something about that earlier, what would you do differently this time?
So hello, Ty. Ty and I used to work together,
Okay.
and so I'm going to make this long answer short. The Netflix series, I think, Octavia Spencer was great. That's always what I say. A lot of people worked really hard on that film, and but I was hoping for Hidden Figures, and I feel like it kind of veered toward Real Housewives of Atlanta.
Ooh,
And I
snap.
had some serious creative differences with the showrunners and the head writer. They did not get Madam Walker's story, so they told the story they wanted to tell. Now, lessons learned. So I've been working on something, on a Madam Walker musical. Those things take a long time, so that could happen. And this time around, because Joy Goddess is absolutely made for the screen, whether it's TV or the big screen, it's made for theater, it's made for a musical. I mean, it is
Mhm.
cinematic
Yeah.
just on its own. So
Mhm.
this time around, I am working from the beginning with people who share my sensibilities, who
Mhm.
get my creative vision, and whose sensibilities and whose experience in what they've done before I respect and believe in. So we're started out with people who I think get it, as opposed to me kind of having a shotgun marriage with some people who didn't get it.
Right. And I mean, that's really it's important with any of our stories, but I think it's even more so because it is your family, it is our history, and to get it wrong, because even though you can write the books and you can do all the interviews and podcasts and stuff like that, some people are still going to believe what they saw on the television show or
Yes,
the movie.
but
So,
that right there, it is our history, and when we don't know our history, people can hoodwink us and make us think, "Oh, that was true," and we don't have anything to come back at them with
mm-hmm.
because we believe the okey doke, and we need to know the real story.
Need to know the real story. So thank you so much for being here, Alelia. As I said, it was an honor to me as someone who's been following your work and the stories of your family and all of that. And just to have you here in this space, in this intimate space, and people to be able to ask questions and things like that. And I'm sure others will look at it later. And please, all of her social media as well as the website has been scrolling at the bottom. So reach out and tell her, what you think, or ask your questions, whatever the case may be, because That's important for authors to know that you are really diving into their work. But I know we talked about it a little bit before we came on, because you are going to be in Atlanta, where I am next weekend. But for people who might want to come out and see you in different places or get their book signed or ask questions, where are some places you'll be, in the next few weeks or few months, just so they'll know?
Right. So on my social media, I'm updating the calendar and I'm leaving that pinned. I'll be on Martha's Vineyard next week on the 30th at the Featherstone Center. I'll be in Baltimore at Enoch Pratt Library on September 4th. I'll be back in Atlanta on September 28th at the 10th. I will be in New York on October 7th and 8th, I think. So I've got there, but look at the website, look at the social media pages. But I just talked to some people in Miami. I'm going to be doing a big luncheon in Miami in November. So I think this is going to go on for a while.
Oh, it will, because sometimes it takes people a while to discover, a story or a book. The buzz gets out there and people start wanting to read it. And one thing I do know, even with like these interviews, sometimes I'll look, but I interviewed that person 3 years ago, and people will discover it because they discover the book, or comes out in a hardback. Maybe when the paperback comes out, people start looking and they find other interviews and things like that. So it will definitely live on.
So listen, let me just say to you before we go how much I admire the community that you've created. So I'm taking notes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hey, and this doesn't have to be the last time, for sure. So I know you got things going on. And I appreciate that. It means a lot more than you know. But Kathleen is saying she loved the rich details of the history and learning about Harlem Renaissance. Someone else saying lovely chat.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Aaliyah and BGC Collective. Praise the ancestors. Yes, praise the ancestors. And it's really got me thinking, like, okay, what I have a book in me, and it's like, okay, what do I want to tap into? Do I want to tap into some of this historical stuff, because I do love it, and I'm just thinking about how much fun it would be to go back and like read some of those old newspapers and stuff.
Listen, you can go down many rabbit holes.
I know.
And it's good, but it's good.
It's good. Oh, I do just have to say this, because Indianapolis, and there's a part in the book where you talk about Aaliyah being with the Divine Nine, and you mentioned Sigma Gamma Rho. I am Sigma Gamma Rho out of Indianapolis. So I was so excited.
That's right, Butler University.
Yes, I was so excited to see my sorors in the book, because a lot of times it's from some of the others, so it was good to see some SG Rho. So thank you.
Absolutely.
And your great grandma. So everybody, thank you so much for being here again. Please go grab a copy of the book if you haven't already done so. It is also available at the Brown Girl Collective Bookstore, which is just that, browngirlcollectivebookstore.com. Actually, I think a few people have already picked it up from there. It's actually attached to Bookshop. So if you like to shop at Bookshop, it is on my page, front and center. So that's all.
And leave me a review on Amazon, but buy the book from Brown Girl Collective Bookstore and then leave a review.
Right, leave the reviews. Those reviews are so important, because again, as we talked about, building the buzz and people knowing, the reviews help it to show up even more. So I do know that. So that's all I have. If you could just don't hang up yet, Ms. Bundles, but let everybody else go. I want to say good night to you. So everybody, we will see you again. Actually, I'm on vacation next week. So I'll see everybody the week after that. And you all take care, and make sure you go and grab this book and, many of the others between now and then. So I'll see you all real soon, and you all take care. All righty. Bye-bye.